Her daddy had a lot of trouble swallowing. She started eating breakfast this morning and got choked.
Are we all due for, oh, sorry about that. We got talking this morning and lost track of time. Sit this down, let me drink before I start choking. Just found out our piano player won't be here, so I'm gonna have to start shaking and getting nervous and sick. Neil worse than me. Neil will have to get going fast. Sorry. I've been trying to practice going slower, but when I get nervous. Okay, we're going to start this morning on page 24. The name of our lesson is Jesus Establishes a New Covenant. And our golden text comes from Hebrews, which is what we're studying, chapter 8, verse 6. No, I think it's just a verse. It says, but now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. And our lesson aim this morning, it says the priesthood of Christ was real and permanent, while that of the Hebrews' economy was a type and was destined in its own nature to be temporary. Christ obtained a more exalted ministry than the Jewish priests held, because he was the mediator in a better covenant, a covenant that related rather to the heart than to external observances. And as I was studying the lesson this week, we had talked a lot last week, and then Buford confirmed it too, and during his message, that a lot of the Bible and understanding the Bible is understanding the culture and the history of what's going on with the Jewish people, because it was, written from, the Bible was written in their time from their perspective, and the more you understand about that, the more the Bible really comes to life to you and what they're talking about and what's happening. And we know originally the Hebrew people were in bondage to Egypt, and they really they had their own community because of slaves, but they were also, part of that Egyptian culture at the time. And as we know, Egypt had gods for everything that moved or walked. There was a god for this. So the Hebrew people were kind of indoctrinated with that too. And we remember when they moved out and when they were when the Lord was moving them toward the promised land, he made it very clear to them that there's not going to be any other gods here, that I am the God that you will serve, and there won't be. So he started setting up parameters and a way for them to worship, and a way for them to get to know him and to know what they were, who he was, how they were to serve him. So if we'll look at Exodus chapter 25, just wanted to kind of go back and remember Exodus is talking about when they left the land of Egypt and they're exiting out and heading toward the promised land. In chapter 25 of Exodus, I'm going to read you the first two verses. It said, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they bring me an offering. From everyone who gives it willingly from his heart shall you take my offering. And then get to, sorry, I don't know why I wrote it down wrong, but I should have read. I thought, what does that have? Exodus chapter 40, starting at 16, says, thus Moses did according to all that the Lord had commanded him, so did he. And it came to pass in the first month of the second, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was raised up. So they, the tabernacle was planned. They had gathered up what it was going to take to make this tabernacle. And the Lord had told Moses, that this was going to be his dwelling place in this tabernacle. And so Moses had taken some time to get this together for the people, because they were kind of nomads wandering around, and they really didn't they couldn't build a temple at the time, because they were in the process of moving to the promised land. So the Lord set up with them a holy place for them to dwell. And then in chapter 40, verse 34, it says, "Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting, because the cloud rested above it. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would go onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not journey till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys." So the tabernacle became the central part. It was, the Lord dwelt in there. So this was their center of worship at the time. And our lesson today, we're talking about Jesus has come into the scene now, and all the worship that this people of his had changed at that time. And we had talked a little bit over the last lessons that we've had in Hebrews, that some of the people were having a really hard time, because they were coming against controversy for being Christians. They were being, people were being killed for doing it. And they were having a hard time. Some of them were really wanting to slide back into what was comfortable, the worship at the temple that they'd had all along, that they would take and that the priest would do. So they were having a real hard time sticking with Jesus and moving forward, because as we know now, it's not necessarily the easy choice to follow Jesus. It's the right choice, but and he has told us it's not always, things aren't going to be perfect, and you say why do bad things happen to good people, but it's not always something that's going to be the easiest choice for us. And these people were finding that out in a very big way, so they were having really controversy within themselves. So we're starting in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 1. Says, "Now the things which we have spoken," this is the sum, "we have such a high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty of heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched, and not man. For every high priest is ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices. Wherefore it is of necessity that this man have somewhat also an offer. For if he were on the earth, he should not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law, who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern showed to thee in the mount." So we're looking back. It says, "Now the things we have spoken, this and some, we have such a high priest who is set at the right hand of the throne of the majesty." After Jesus left the earth, he went to sit on Jesus at the right hand of the throne. He ascended to the most important place that there was. Do you remember when we were studying about Jesus earlier, and that two of his disciples came and their mama came to try to secure that they would sit on the right hand of Jesus when he went. So that, this was the most prominent place that you could be. That was, the writer says, the right hand was regarded as a place of principal honor. And when it is said that Christ is at the right hand of God, the meaning is that he is exalted to the highest honor in the universe. He is near to God, is high in his affection and love, and is raised to the most elevated position. So when he left us on this earth, through all that he went through and the choices that he made to go through with it, he was elevated to the highest position. It says, verse 2 says, a minister of the sanctuary, the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched and not man. So, there were Jewish priests at the time of the tabernacle that performed the services and did, according to the will of God that we did. But Jesus did these same things. If you remember, he came to the earth and he was a servant. He came as a servant to the people. He lived as we did, and he died a horrible death. So we see that. I was listening to, I don't remember who it was this week, but they were talking about foot washing, that, what such a humble service that was to do to people. And, we talked about that Jesus came and, they were talking about back then, it was a very lowly service thing to do. These people walked barefoot, they walked in, in dusty, dirty roads. So, it was something to do to take that honor, to be able to, get a basin of water and a towel and to wash dirty feet. I mean, that's a humble service that now we see our Lord is exalted to the most highest position that he can be through that. It says in verse 3, for every high priest is ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices where it is of necessity that this man have somewhat also to offer. For if he were on earth, he should not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law. So, I want to read a couple things that the lesson writer says. It says, he as an antitype had himself to offer. So the priest, offered sacrifices according to what the people could. They might have bulls or they might have doves, but what the people could afford to do. But Jesus, because he was perfect, had himself to offer for us. It said his human nature upon the altar of his divine nature as the great atoning sacrifice that finished transgression and made an end of sin once and for all. He has the incense of his own righteousness and merits. It says we must not dare to approach God or to present anything to him, but in and through Christ, depending upon his merits and mediation, for if we are accepted, it is in the beloved. So, it's saying through our own merits, we have zero right to come before God. But because of Jesus Christ, he gave us that right to be able to boldly, as the Bible says, go before the throne of grace, because we have Jesus standing as our mediator. As to our own merits, we have zero to go forth on that. Verse 5 says, who serve unto us the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. So hath he that thou make all these things according to the pattern showed to thee in the mount. And this was referring to what we had read in chapter 40, how, Moses didn't just come up with, I'll make a tabernacle and I'll put these things in it. That tabernacle was ordered in a certain fashion that he was told how to make. This wasn't something that, like I say, was his. And it said, it was an antitype, so it was kind of a foreshadowing of heaven and showing these people, these are going to be the parameters of the heavenly tabernacle that will later come into existence, which, of course, they didn't know at the time what Jesus meant when, back in the Old Testament, Moses, and he knew to do what the Lord was asking him to do, but he didn't totally know the full picture because he hadn't seen it at that point. And verse 6 says, but now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant which was established upon better promises. So it says, for if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. So if, the first covenant was between God and man. Jesus hadn't come into earth. I'll read what the writer said, be more clear than, says the meaning is not that the first covenant made under Moses had any sinful faults or communicated that which was wrong, but that it was not complete in itself and provided only a temporary salvation and a provisional deliverance. And we know as we've studied the covenant that was made for them, the rules that were set aside, it started, the Lord gave them the 10 Commandments, but we remember that the Jewish people added so many things to this covenant that was made. They added all these rules and regulations that came from their heads and not that they were ordered from the Lord to do, that it came almost impossible to be able to live by these things because they had taken what the Lord and they had just kept adding and adding and adding to that. So that they had really gone, put man's touch and something that had become impossible.
I went back door, get ready.
Yes, and kind of, we know the priests were really the spearheads to who killed Jesus. They had become comfortable in that. They were profiting from these laws that the Lord had established for his people. Man can take something good and get hold of it for his own uses and make something that was, that was meant for their good to be not so good for them after all. In verse 8 it says, for finding fault with him, he said, behold, the day shall come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them out of the hand to lead them out of the hand of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith the Lord. And the writer says the old covenant was to cease existence and a new one take its place. This new covenant the Jews should have been prepared to expect, as Jeremiah had so completely foretold. So as we look back in Jeremiah in chapter 31, verse 31 through 34, he said that there would be a new covenant coming. But these people, they were blinded to a lot. I think they got comfortable in the covenant that they had with the new rules that they had put on it, that they lost sight of the promises that were to come, that they were happy with the things that were, and especially as we said, the priests and the leaders, because they had kind of found their spot. They had kind of found their spot in Roman society. And, the Romans were allowing them to lead this temple worship, and they were taking advantage of people. We know in the temples they were buying and selling. We remember when Jesus came into that scene, he wasn't happy at all. And we saw a side of Jesus that really during the writings in the New Testament hadn't seen such fury come out of him, that something that was being done in his house of worship, that, he pretty much cleaned it out and didn't want that to be going on in its place of worship. So we'll go ahead to verse 10. It says, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, said the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. When I read to you what the lesson writer says, the laws of the Hebrews pertain mainly to external rites and ceremonies. The laws of the new dispensation will relate particularly to the inner man and be designed to control the heart. So this new covenant that was coming to them was completely different than they had. As we had talked about, the first covenant there were rituals and rites and things. And we know the priests did most of these things. The people took their offerings and their bulls or doves or whatever it may be. They presented them at the temple, and the priests did the offering and the sacrifices. So it was something that was kind of removed. It was like if we had to come to church and we couldn't worship of our own, that we had to go through Buford solely to worship. So it was, there was kind of a step back from the Lord. But this new covenant, he's saying, it's not just gonna be a rote thing that you do, because that's the thing, we have to go to the temple and we have to take this and we do it. But, it's something that's gonna be to every man connected to your heart. It's gonna be something that is not just rules that you have to live, but it's gonna be a heartfelt thing that you have to truly believe, feel, and live. That way it's gonna be a deeper, the writer says, to be God's people implies that we give God our whole hearts, serve him with all our might and strength, and have no other object of worship or dependence other than himself. So, there's not certain worships or certain things that, that you put above him. It's just a worship of the Lord strictly from your heart to him. And in verse 11 it says, and they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. And some things, it says, hence it was necessary that every man should do what he could to instruct his neighbor and brother. But the prophecy here indicates that there should be, under the gospel dispensation, a profusion of the divine light. It says, but eventually there shall be a universal diffusion of the knowledge of God. And I hadn't thought of, I guess back in terms of that, the priest did these things for the people, that, you went through the priest. But now, he has made each of us act as priests, and that, we have the authority now to spread this gospel and to tell the word. Back in the day, they didn't have the Bible that we have that gives them knowledge of us. That they had, the Old Testament written, but it didn't sit at everybody's house like it does now. They had to really, not refer, I can't think of the word, but depend on this, the tabernacle at the time, and they had to depend on going and learning the word, because it wasn't available to them individually and personally as much as it is to us now. So this verse, he's saying, he's offering us he's teaching it, and we're to take what he's given us individually and to take it out and to teach to other men. Verse 12 says, for I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. And that's a good thing. If you think about it, how merciful he is to us. And he says, for their sins and iniquities that I will remember no more.
Is that almost like saying, where you used to go to the priest and everything, is that like after Jesus was crucified on the cross, you could ask forgiveness and your sins, and he would,
that we didn't have to remember when Jesus was crucified. And I love to just see what it was really like. But remember, it talks about the veil of the temple just ripped. And from what I've read, it wasn't a shirt like mine that I've had 50 years that if you move too fast, you're going to rip. It was something to have had that big veil ripped. And remember, we've talked about in the past, I know the priest went in to the holiest of holies. He went before God, and if he didn't go of a true, cleansed, repentant spirit, remember they had bells that would ring so they would know that they were still alive, because they could be struck dead if they didn't perform. But now, God has opened up that temple, like Eddie said, and we have access to the Lord through Jesus. It's different. They didn't have Jesus as a mediator back then. They had the priests. But we now-
Going to the temple, that you are.
Yes. It's totally changed now. And we have the rights and the authority to go directly to Jesus. And, sometimes I think about, because everything in the Bible, it's such higher than my thoughts or whatever. And so I sat and kind of ponder how things happen, that, because Jesus was able to live our life, to know what we go through, to know what heartbreak is. We remember when Lazarus died and Jesus was brought to him. He didn't cry, because my mother said crocodile tears. He truly cried because of the loss of his friend Lazarus. So he knows how we feel at losses. He knows how you feel when he went back to his own hometown and the people wouldn't accept him. I mean, and how would that feel to you? And he experienced that, when you think of the death on the cross, of the horror, and, and it says even when he was preparing, knowing that they were coming to get him, that he was sweating blood. And I had read something that was talking about how your body can get under such severe stress that happens to you. So we know that, Jesus knew that. That's something that's never happened to me. I mean, I'm stressed out right now thinking about playing the piano, but I'm not, nothing to that extent.
When Moses led the people out of, and we parted the sea from them, he gave them manna from heaven, and then he took care of them, and then they still turned around and wanted to make the golden images for God.
Yeah.
That really got me out of it, man.
Yeah, it seems like, the more the Lord tries to provide, the more we
The worst we did.
kick it off. Yeah.
That's the same with that.
Yes.
Part.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus came and died a horrible, despicable, they didn't kill everybody on the cross. They saved that for the worst of the worst. And also is a real humiliating kind of death. It's like, you're up there with the worst of the worst, and you're a spectacle for humiliation. And he did all that, and he's standing. So he's able to stand between us and God, because God's not able to look upon sinful man, but Jesus is able to stand there. And like y'all said, we don't accept it, or we do things against it all the time when he's given us this offer. And it's such a, when you talk to people that just won't hear it, they just won't listen to what the Lord's done for them. It's almost too easy for them that he can love you so much that there's nothing that you can do to gain this righteousness through him, that he's given it to us. And that's really hard for people to take. They just, they won't accept you, can I buy it, or I have to act I have to act such a way to deserve that. But if you wait for that, it's never going to happen. If I'm going to clean myself up, and once I'm nearly perfect, then I'm going to start going to church and do that. You're going to spend a lifetime, and you're going to fall back and do it. Just don't work that way. We're not made with that pure heart. I guess the man was richly made with that pure heart, but without Jesus, we can't seem to do it. I wanted to read the lesson writer also. It says, strictly speaking, God cannot forget anything, but he forgives so completely that the sins are as if buried in deep oblivion. So, God's not forgetful. He's the knows all, so, but he's taken away from us. It says he forgives so completely that it says, this rich abounding mercy is the reason of man's fuller, clear knowledge of God. Forgiveness leads to gratitude and love to the forgiver. And love leads to the clearer, wider knowledge of him. If you would know God truly, intimately, deeply, you must love him. And verse 13 says, in that he saith, the new covenant he hath made, the first old, now which decayeth and waxeth old, is ready to vanish away. So, the old covenant's gone. Once Jesus came and died on the earth, like Eddie said, you don't have to go to the temple and take doves or whatever you can afford. You don't have to speak to a priest and have him, speak to God for you. We're allowed access to the throne of grace. And, sometimes I think about, I guess, the highest person in our country or whatever, the president. I'm never going to get to talk to the president. I don't have any thoughts that I would ever be a person. But we're given direct access to the God of the universe, which makes presidents, leaders, whatever, or really no more worth to it than we are as individuals. And he has given us direct access. We've got a direct phone line to the throne of God right now.
It seems like the more, if you're like the president, vice president, and parliamentary representatives, seems like the more higher up they get, the least they, one of them is, you don't ever hear hardly ever mention God. I mean, he's in control of everything.
Do you think money, now I don't need anybody else, but money, I can buy whatever I need, and then they get that power and stuff that, really God's, it's hard to humble yourself down when you get so.
I'd rather be the poorest guy in the world. No God, I know where he's rich.
Yeah. Like we've talked, this lifetime is very short compared to the choice that we have to make for an eternity. And, that power and prestige for 70 years is.
And the thing with God, he don't change. He's the same today, tomorrow, forever.
Right.
That's a good thing.
And, sometimes, I was trying to think who it was on the 700 Club. They were talking about it was somebody in a higher office or whatever that really seemed to have humble thoughts toward the Lord. And that, like Annie said, that's a few and far between. And I think we really need to pray for our leaders because they have a lot of authority in what happens to us as a people.
Well, and you can tell they don't, they're not a man of God because if they were, they wouldn't be pushing abortion.
Yeah.
And all this stuff.
And it worries me when they start having these squabbles about, Israel and, Israel's not treating the Palestinians right or whatever, and then people start taking sides. And I mean, personally, I think if the United States splits from Israel, does not back them, we're doomed. I mean, this book tells us that, he knows.
Whether we back them or not, but the Lord's going to take care of it.
Yes, absolutely. And, and I think whether we back them or not, it's whether we have good.
The Bible says that he can fight the battle for you.
And we've seen in our studies in the past where he's taken one angel has killed 185,000 of the Syrians. Yeah, it's like, he don't have any trouble doing it, but we best have the good sense to stand behind.
But I think it, no matter what your president does, or any of your senators, or anything, as long as you believe in God, so then he'll take care of you.
Yeah. And, and I think that we do need to pray for our country and to pray that God lead them. We studied too in the Bible that these rulers who had no idea who the Lord was, and I'm trying to think of specific instances, they've done things and made decisions that were according to God's will, not theirs or not. And they had to have been thinking, why on earth did I do that? That God led them and pulled, history is not just flailing, God's in charge. I mean, so, we have to recognize that, but, whether we like or whatever, because the world's in a really bad situation right now. My granddaughter's husband is in the service, and he's on alert now to go overseas again, and your son, so there, I mean, it's a bad time for us, so we really need to pray, because these few people who may or may not have any faith or making decisions for all of us, and our families and our children and stuff. So. But like we say, God, Jesus has came to earth to make it possible for us to speak to Him directly. And we need to use this authority that He's given us. Does anybody have anything to add or listen today or anything, any thoughts?